everybody out there. This is Dan Carley, one of the trio from Tailboard Talk, the Fire Engineering Talk radio show, and one of the co-authors from Tailboard Talk also, a column that ran on Fire Engineering's website for a couple of years. This class I'm going to be teaching this year at FDIC is called Seeking Out High Reliability Employees. It kind of goes along with the theme that we've written about and talked about on our radio show, but this is something very specific. And it came to me while I was reading a book about Vietnam, and it amazed me that of the over 400 casualties that happened on Hamburger Hill, over 30% of them were caused by friendly fire. And what really caught my attention was the simple fact that a lot of these friendly fire incidents were simply because commanding officers wouldn't listen to subordinate officers. They were literally Subordinate officers were literally calling the supervisors on the radio and saying, "Hey, you're bombing us," and they'd argue with them and say, "No, you're not," and the bombs are dropping on them. And during the course of reading this book, there's a lot of examples of how they were measuring their commanding officers. And granted, there was always a measurement of how good they were, how technically competent they were, how good they were at strategy and tactics, but it was also a lot about how they presented themselves, how they took care of their soldiers, how they had an ability to build confidence, those types of things, how to stay focused on what was important. Well, how does this compare to the U.S. Fire Service? I know there are comparisons. I know there are similarities in the type of people they're looking for, but how do they compare? And so I started thinking about it, and a lot like soldiers in Vietnam, there's a lot of downtime interrupted by moments of hard, heavy work, maybe moments of terror, whatever you want to call it. But we spend a lot of time outside of emergency scenes. Now, at those emergency scenes, our officers obviously need to be making competent decisions because there's immediate repercussions for bad decisions. Therefore, firefighters want to see their officers, captains, battalion chiefs, whatever rank structure you use, they want to see their officers who are making decisions to be technically competent. But day in and day out, the things that cause morale problems, the things that set one crew apart from another, or the things that boost morale. I mean, there's a double-edged sword to all of this. There's positives and negatives. The things that are cause bad morale can also cause a good morale, the opposite. So that's what firefighters are looking for also. They want an officer who has the ability to understand what they need. They want an officer that builds confidence. They want an officer who can stay focused on what is important. So what can we learn from the soldiers in Vietnam compared to U.S. Fire Service? Well, we can learn that firefighters do want technically competent officers. We can also learn that leadership is a cornerstone of firefighter safety and highly reliable employees. Unfortunately, our testing systems that you see used typically in the fire service don't always bring this kind of officer forward. The tests that I've seen, the process that I've seen, often start with a written test. Well, a written test is great at measuring technical competency, but even more so, it's great at measuring a person's ability to memorize stuff out of a textbook. It doesn't usually look for leadership potential. There is an option out there for written tests that can measure leadership potential, or it's not really a written test, it's more of an assessment, but there are those options. But the tests that we use in the fire service typically are technical type information that we have, ladder lengths and GPMs per hose size and those types of things, or nozzle size. So if we know that firefighters want a technically competent officer, but they also want an officer who demonstrates good leadership, what can we do about that in our selection process? Well, there are a lot of good ways to improve that. For one thing, the written test shouldn't be the first step. The written test should be part of the process because we want technically competent officers, but those written tests may be filtering out the potential leaders, because someone who's a good leader may not score quite as high on the written test, but someone who scores high on a written test may not be a good leader. And so we're not measuring everything that we're looking for in that written test. So we'll talk about some of the ways in this class. We'll talk about some of the things to be looking for, some of the ways that we can do that, some of the ways we can realign our testing processes to look for those desirable traits, something that's not just memorized out of a textbook. So come see us, come see me at FDIC. If you're interested, this class might help give you some ideas on ways to improve the fire service testing process or the process in your fire departments and seek out some of those highly reliable employees who are also good leaders, who are also technically competent.